Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany Muller, and I'm the president of In Citizens United and Let America Vote. And we're so honored to be here tonight with Governor Steve Bullock, Rafe Graybill, and Bryce Bennett. We're going to have a fantastic discussion about money in politics, transparency and accountability in our campaign finances, and the right to vote. In Citizens United was founded in 2015 to help elect candidates all over the country who are going to pass bold anti-corruption reforms, who are committed to cleaning up the system and making government work for everyone, not just the wealthy few. Candidates who have made ending the influence of dark money in politics and making government work for Montanans the better policy and the right policy. Candidates just like what we have here with us today. It's the big money donors and corporate interests that are too often both rigging the system in their favor and suppressing the vote. And we're fighting back against proposals across the country at every level of government that make it harder for eligible voters to cast a ballot, whether it's voter ID requirements, purges from the voter rolls, voter intimidation, or not being able to send out ballots. And I know you all had a big win today in Montana, so I know we'll get to talk about that too. So much of the work to protect voting rights happens in state and local government, and we need to elect candidates that are going to ensure fair maps, voter rights, and getting big money out of politics. And the public officials here today deserve great credit for passing the Montana Disclose Act with bipartisan support, no less. In 2015, Governor Bullock, who has really made combating dark money and unlimited undisclosed money in our politics his life's work, led the charge and worked with Republicans in the Montana legislature to pass the Disclose Act into law. And the law has been hugely successful. It's made elections in the state more open and transparent. It's prevented groups that don't disclose their donors from interfering in Montana's elections, just like the Koch brothers. And the law is evidence that getting corporate and dark money out of politics is not a partisan issue, except in Washington, D.C., where too often it's being held up by Mitch McConnell and Steve Daines. And the Federal Disclose Act would shine a bright light on the flood of dark money in our elections. You know, what we've seen over the last 10 years since the Citizens United ruling is over $2 billion of undisclosed money flooding into our federal elections. That's not okay, and that is hurting and breaking our democracy. So the Federal Disclose Act would address serious vulnerabilities in the system that currently allows foreign actors and big corporations to flood our federal elections with undisclosed money. It was a major component of the For the People Act, which passed the House in 2019 and has been sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. And it's critical that we pass comprehensive anti-corruption reform and protect the right to vote at the state and federal levels so that our government works for you, not just the big corporations and special interests. So we're going to get into this discussion. It's really my pleasure to be here with these amazing candidates tonight. And we're just thrilled to get started. So I'm going to kick it to all three of you, which is, can you give me an overview of the Montana Disclose Act and explain the role that each of you played in passing this bill and bringing it into law? And Governor, why don't we start with you?
Sounds great, Tiffany. It's great to be with you. And what's fun about this is each one of us did have a role in that. Look, Montanans can certainly take pride in that we were when every other state said game over. When I was Attorney General, we were the first state to challenge Citizens United, take it all the way up the Supreme Court, based on that history of the corrupting influence of money in our system, but then Montanans taking it back. And when we lost on a 5-4 decision, first started in 2013 with what the Trace Act was, but then in 2015, finally getting what the Disclose Act passed. And generally what this says is 90 days out from an election, I don't care if you call yourself Americans for America, if you're going to spend in our state elections, you have to disclose where all that money's coming from, right? If elected officials are going to be kind of like NASCAR, sponsored by all kinds of different groups, Montanans and Americans ought to know at least who's doing the sponsoring. And to Tiffany's point, like never in 12 years have I had somebody come up to me and say, Bullock, the problem with this system is there's just not enough spending in our elections. And even more than the spending, the threat of these dark money groups changes behavior in Washington, D.C. It changes so the people won't even take the positions that it's expected. You know, you can look at both disclosed and undisclosed money. I mean, there's a reason why Senator Daines has wanted to strip away coverage for pre-existing conditions, won't deal with prescription drug prices, and so much more. Because his hand's been in their pockets and his attention's been in their pockets, not in all of us. It was a great bipartisan win when we got the Disclose Act through and when Bryce and Rafe, the roles that they played. But more than a bipartisan win, it made people know that they are more important than any special interest or any corporate PAC. And that's on election day, 34 days from now. Our vote really is our voice, and we are more powerful. So we can take pride that Montana has led the way in that, in other areas when it comes to the corruption agenda. And it's so great to have these folks on there so they can talk about some of the work that they did in getting us to this point.
So, Bryce, you want to go next and talk about how you helped get this law passed?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the opportunity to join you here tonight. You know, it was a harrowing task to get the Disclose Act through the legislature. I mean, after these other folks who are joining us here did great work putting the bill together, trying to get it past Republican-controlled legislatures was far from easy. And I think the experience that we'd had with the Trace Act the session before really showed us that it was going to be tooth and nail every step of the way. But I was chosen by my colleagues to help shepherd this bill through the House, where I was serving at the time. I worked with the Republican sponsor of the bill to make sure that both his caucus and my caucus understood the bill, because there was certainly a lot of new elements in here that people were confused about. And we wanted to make sure that they had a perfect understanding of it so they felt confident when they went to the floor and had to defend it. But we had a lot of battles actually getting it to the floor. I mean, the out-of-touch politicians who were running the House at the time, who are actually my friend Rafe's opponent at this point, did everything they could to try to stop this bill in its tracks. I mean, they wouldn't assign it to a committee, so we had to get innovative. We had to look deep into the rules. We had to organize and make sure that we were able to get that bill assigned to a committee. And then when we finally got that bill a hearing, it got stuck there again because the committee chair, under the thumb of our Speaker of the House, did everything he could to make sure they never took it up for a vote. So again, we had to find every trick in the book to make sure that we were able to blast that out of committee, put it on the House floor, only for them to bring 14 separate amendments into that debate to try to undermine this incredible bill that made sure that dark money didn't have a place here in Montana. So at the end of the day, after we had gone through each of those amendments that would have destroyed this bill on razor thin margins, some dying 49-51, some dying 50-50, we were able to get that bill past the House by a vote of 51-49. We had zero margin for error. And I'm proud of the fact that I was able to bring some people together around this common sense idea that every penny in our election should be accountable and transparent to the people of Montana.
Wow. 51-49. That's incredible.
Yeah.
We call that a landslide in Montana.
Rafe, tell us about your role in this fight. And then can you also kick off, I mean, I made a comment in the opening about how successful this law has been, but can you also tell us a little bit about how we've seen it play out and what good it's done for Montana? Because I think it's amazing.
Yeah, and I think on the broadest level, the Disclose Act was significant because it ushered in a new way of thinking about money in politics. Before the Disclose Act, for the longest time, we regulated money in a very odd way. We said basically, if you're the kind of group that needs to file disclosures, you need to file disclosures. And so then groups that didn't want to disclose just called themselves something else, and they became 501c4s, or they rebranded themselves. And what was so smart about the Disclose Act and so important is it said, look, we don't care what you call yourself. We don't care what name is on the PO box, what your tax status is. We care about what you do. And if you do certain things like say candidates' names in a negative or positive way near an election, you're probably an electioneering group and you're probably engaging in election activity. And so by shifting from how you file your taxes to what you actually do, it captured this whole broad range of conduct that's designed to influence our elections that wasn't previously being covered. And that was a big shift. And, you see that all over the country now as kind of the gold standard for how you find money in elections. But really, it's the hard work of folks like Governor Bullock and like Bryce getting this done and, running circles around. My current opponent, Austin Knudsen, was Speaker of the House at the time. And he did everything he could to try to stop this bill from passing. And thank God for folks like Bryce and the governor outsmarting him every step of the way, because we have this really good law. As a result, it's worked. I mean, you look at the 2016 election in Montana, first election after the Disclose Act is in effect, you get to that 90-day window from the elections, and the Koch brothers aren't there because they don't want to disclose their money. And it's, basically you have to put up or shut up. And if you're not willing to say who your donors are, you can't be spending in our elections. And that's a good thing. As Governor Bullock said, no one in Montana right now would turn on their TV and say, gosh, I wish there were more political ads.
Yeah, and Tiffany, I'll only add that Rafe was my lawyer through parts of this as well. Like, look, this thing was challenged all the way up the U.S. Supreme Court. And even with the court that we currently have, that it was upheld. And I think we're the first state to ban foreign money spending in our elections. We did an executive order that Rafe helped me draft that said, right now, because Citizens United, I can't tell corporations you can't spend or contribute to influence our elections. But not just in the 90 days. If you want to bid on a state contract, you have to disclose all those expenditures and contributions. Think about it, the federal government did that. They contract with dang near every company in the country, if not the world. I mean, we need to get that sunshine and transparency along as we attack this from other ways.
Well, and Governor, I think that's a great segue into kind of my next question, which is you have been so innovative in Montana in fighting the influence of money in politics, and you really have set that gold standard for the country and helped actually give ideas for the federal legislation that we're trying to get pushed through too. But there's a long tradition of this in Montana. So can you talk about why this issue is so important to Montanans and about the long, proud tradition you have about good government there in Montana?
Yeah, and I think, this came about long before I ever was around. I mean, we had William Clark and the Copper Kings that literally controlled every local, state, and federal election. Never forget, so he bought a seat in it. And when the Senate committee was thinking about should he actually get to serve as senator, I mean, Clark said, there's so much money in politics out there that people don't even want to vote. And it takes a lot of my men to go around among them, stir them up to even get them to vote. That was in the early 1900s, and Montanans finally said enough. We passed this Corrupt Practices Act of 1912 that said corporations couldn't spend or contribute in our elections. And for a century, we had some of the lowest contribution limits in the state level, and we still do, in the nation. So that elections really are about this. Even when William Clark was there, Mark Twain talked about him, and he said, Clark buys politicians like most people buy food. Corruption no longer smells offensive in Montana. And Montanans took it back. So that's when I was Attorney General. That was why I was like, boy, not only for 100 years back of Montanans, but going forward, we have to make sure that elections are decided by people. And it's people's voices more than these dark money groups and those who want to take us on from that perspective. And we've continued that. Like, think about these 501c4 groups that Rafe mentioned, right? They're social welfare groups that don't have to disclose their donors. Like the current administration got rid of this rule that said even the IRS has to collect the names of these donors. Right? And said, we don't need to do that anymore. That rule had been around since Richard Nixon, not exactly the model of transparency. And Senator Daines actually voted to continue to shield those donors' names. We took them to court. Rafe did a lot of work on that, and we won. This is not a partisan issue. This is a special interest issue. And unfortunately, the corporations and the special interests time and time again line up with guys like Steve Daines And that's where we're blocked along the way. And if we can make our country work more like our elections have been in Montana.
Well, and I think that's a good question, which is, so what is the special interest money and the dark money? What does it hold up progress on? What all have you seen in Montana that they're trying to influence or trying to buy, that because of disclosure, you can actually root out and begin to make progress on other issues? Can you talk to the viewers about, Rafe or Bryce, about what you've seen there in Montana, about how special interests are trying to buy policy outcomes?
Well, let me just touch on some of my concerns with dark money. I mean, because I think that sometimes when people hear about dark money, they just correlate it with, oh my gosh, there's so many new ads on my TV and my mailbox is just getting filled with endless amounts of flyers. And that's a problem unto dark money itself. But the larger problem is that it is so corrupting to our democracy at its core, because it drowns out the voices of everyday people. And then those people, and I can tell you from talking with people all over the state, when they see that endless amounts of dark money come into this state, when there's these special interests that are dumping buckets upon buckets, millions upon millions of dollars into the state, there's far too many people that say, what's the point? My voice will never be louder than some of these folks. So why do I even share it? Why do I even participate? Why do I even vote? I mean, so this is something much bigger than how many ads we see on TV. It's about making sure that people have confidence in their democracy, making sure that people know that the only voice that matters on election day should be theirs. I mean, that's to me what the Disclose Act was all about, making sure that the only voice that matters on election day is the people of Montana. The special interests have a whole lot of folks out there that are looking out for them. Our democracy and the people that are on this call have been working hard to make sure that on election day, it's our voices that are carried.
I was just reading a study the other day that showed that only 17% of Americans think the government is working on behalf of the people. That's really frightening, actually, that there's such a lack of faith and trust. And I agree with you. I think this issue is a big part of that, because they think it's working on behalf of a few big interests and not the American people. Frankly, they're not wrong. Right? But you guys have been fighting that and showing us the way there in Montana. So Rafe, with the Montana Disclose Act in place, what's next in terms of continuing to protect Montana's elections from dark money and from, further corruption?
Well, I think if we know one thing about money is that it finds a way. And the project of making sure the elections belong to people is something that never expires, and you have to remain vigilant. And that's why it's so important to have a U.S. Senator in Steve Bullock, who will go and fight to have the federal legislation we need to bring the kind of transparency we've had in Montana to federal elections. It's why it's so important, folks like Bryce Bennett in the Secretary of State's office. It's why I'm running for Attorney General. One of the things that's so gratifying about getting to litigate against these groups and bring these groups to court is, for most of us, these groups exist as a P.O. box or a briefly uttered, disclosure at the end of an ad or something. When you go to court against these guys, they actually have to show up. You mentioned I think Governor Bullock mentioned the executive order he authored around contractor transparency in Montana. Well, we got sued over that. And just a few weeks ago, we went to federal court here in Montana and stood up and heard from the other side and heard their story. And it was just so telling to me. It's sort of your earlier question as well. The lawyer for the other side went to the courtroom and said, I've never been to Montana before. I really like your trails. It's a nice state. And then proceeded to talk about how his client wanted to buy the governor's race here. Like looking him in the eye, it really has an effect. And it gives you a sense of, there are forces out there that want to influence our elections. And I think it goes back to the sense of deep pride and ownership in our politics that Montanans feel. And for 100 years, they've been trying to buy us, and we don't want that to happen. And it's a collective effort, but it's also why these elections are so important.
So, Governor, I think that's a great segue into, you are running for the U.S. Senate, and this has been your life's work to clean up corruption in our government and to root out dark money. So when you join the Senate, not if, but when, what are you going to do to further campaign finance reform, and how are you going to help fix the system?
Thanks, Tiffany. And, it really is dispiriting when you say only 17% of folks actually have trust that government works for them, because this is about fixing the system. And it's also about making people believe that this matters. And you look at drug costs are 20% of overall healthcare costs. And we can't even figure out the way to make affordable, accessible, getting drugs in an affordable, accessible way, or healthcare as it's being undermined time and time again. And folks are getting the money from the insurance companies and the drug companies. So we have to take that on for this and so many issues. And I'll take what I've learned in Montana, and I've learned from the people in Montana, not just the people on this call, but regular folks saying, my voice has to matter, even if that voice disagrees with me. And we can make change in Washington, D.C. Things like the executive order that we did with contractors. There's no reason that we shouldn't actually be able to pass that. There's no reason that 501c4s can hide their donors. We need to work every single day to restore that trust in government. And the way we restore that trust in government is make our elected officials actually accountable to the people, not the corporate PACs. Steve Daines has taken over 2 million of it, not the threats of all this outside spending, but actually make it people accountable to you all. And I'm going to take that agenda and what we've been able to do in Montana, because it has been bipartisan, and I'm going to walk into DC. Look, I'm not naive, but I'm sufficiently idealistic that we can get this, because making sure that people have a voice in the system, that's not a partisan issue. That's an American issue.
Well, and it is an issue where we know the people are on our side. Republicans, Democrats, Independents. It is only the politicians who are benefiting from a rigged system where the special interests benefit them who want to uphold the status quo. I think everybody else knows we have to fix this system. And I sure know that I feel a lot better with the three of you in office to help fix it. So I think that we have Sylvia here with us today to actually help all the folks watching figure out how they can sign up to volunteer and help all three of you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tiffany. So I am Sylvia. I'm an organizer for the coordinated campaign. I work in Butte and Beaverhead County. So I'm originally from a pretty small town and kind of a rural community. So I grew up, playing in our local parks, spending my weekends at the library and learning from school teachers who taught me kind of how big the world was and how everyone could make a difference in it. So I understood really early, I think, that our public institutions are more than beneficial. They are essential. Our schools, our elections, our support services, they make up the fabric of our democracy. And I also knew that kind of as we've seen today, there are forces out there that definitely stand to profit from dividing us, and that we need public servants who can heal those divisions, lead with empathy, and work to make our communities healthier and stronger. So when Steve Bullock jumped into the Montana Senate race, I knew I wanted to work for him because he is the kind of leader who can work across the aisle to get things done and who understands why and how we have to protect our civic institutions, and who also never forgets kind of who he's fighting for. So I'm here because, Montana has a choice this November. And when there's a choice to be made, I think we have to, reflect a little bit. We have to think, what do we want for our communities and for future generations of Montanans? How can we prepare them for change? And how can we strengthen everything that makes this state so great? So public lands are on the ballot, education is on the ballot, and the sanctity of our democracy is on the ballot. And I think the choice is pretty clear. Steve Bullock, Rafe Graybill, and Bryce Bennett have demonstrated they will fight for our elections, our schools, our healthcare system, and our public lands to be fair, open, and accessible. We know that they can weather the sort of rough winds of division to do what's right, because that is what they have done their entire careers. And there is nothing more important than making sure we elect them this cycle. So that kind of brings me to today, right? It is September 30th, 2020. There are 34 days until Election Day, and I know that on November 4th, I want to be able to go home to my family, my friends, my teachers, my neighbors. I want to look them in the eye and say honestly that I turned out every single vote I could. I called every undecided voter that I could. I gave every little bit left in me to this campaign because our future does depend on it. And I know I can't do it alone. And when I see how hard our volunteers are working, grinding through calls, organizing their friends, knocking packets, even though it's super cold and there's food back at the office, I have full faith that with enough people power behind us, we can win this entire thing. So if you've been working with us already, thank you sincerely. When we do win, it will be because of all of your hard work. And if you're new, there's no better time to jump in. So call your organizer, show up at your local campaign office, sign up to volunteer, or text Bullock to 30200. Bring your hopes, your dreams, your questions, and your spirit, because we're going to need every single bit of it. So let's do this.
Well, like Sylvia said, we are 34 days out from the most important election of our lifetime, and it is clear that there is a choice to be made, a choice between whether government works for you or whether government works for the special interests. And I know that we need Steve Bullock, Bryce Bennett, and Rafe Graybill to win, so that we can actually have a government that works for you. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. It was such a pleasure to be able to do this with you. And I hope you stay safe and stay well.
Thank you, Tiffany, for the work that not only you did tonight, but the work you do every single day to restore democracy in the way that we ought to have it. And Sylvia, you were a rock star too. Thank you. Thank all of you.